She lived quietly, speaking only through the rhythm of her knitting needles. He, a clumsy journalist, found the scarf she'd dropped on a train platform. No words were exchanged, but from that moment on, an invisible thread began to pull them gently toward one another. The scarf, thought to be forgotten, turned out to be a first hello, and what seemed like a small mistake became the tender beginning of something very real. This is their story, quiet, warm, and just enough to make your heart ache on a snowy afternoon. The first winter wind crept through the cracks of the old station walls, bringing with it the sharp scent of metal and a faint trace of fresh coffee drifting from a small corner cafe. The loudspeaker echoed boarding calls across the crowd, a blur of footsteps and murmured destinations, each person moving toward a different stop, a different pause in their story. In the midst of that nameless bustle, Grace stood quietly by platform sign number 4, fingers clutching the frayed strap of her daisy-printed canvas bag. Her eyes followed the rails stretching into the distance, though it wasn't clear whether she was waiting for a train or for herself to take another step forward. In her hands, she held a small box, wrapped in old newspaper and tied with red string. Inside was a plum-colored knitted scarf, one she'd worked on for the past 4 weeks. Each night after work, after caring for her mother, Grace sat by her window, looping yarn into silence, each stitch sewing together the hollow places inside. The scarf had been meant for her grandmother, the one person who had once said to her, "Your hands don't just make things, they carry feeling." But her grandmother had passed away last year. And now, for the first time, Grace wanted to give the scarf to someone she didn't know, a local volunteer group collecting warm items for people without homes. She had hesitated, written and rewritten the email countless times. But last night, she'd finally placed the scarf into the box and embroidered a small message on the edge. "Thank you for being warm." Not everyone would understand, but it was what she had always wanted to say to the world. Simple, quiet, sincere. The train pulled in with a low roar, passengers spilling out in waves. Grace gripped the box and stepped toward the car. But in the shuffle, her arm brushed against the backpack of a child darting past. The box slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. She crouched to find it, but the tide of feet was relentless, offering no space to turn back. By the time the train began to move again, the scarf was gone. Liam arrived at the station 10 minutes late. His coffee had gone cold, the article he was supposed to finish still half-written, and his recorder, battery blinked red. He was lost in the noise of his own mind when his foot bumped something beneath a bench, a small paper-wrapped box tied in red string. He assumed it was someone's forgotten lunch. But when he opened it, the first thing that struck him was the scent, not sweet, not perfumed, just the raw warmth of fresh yarn, a hint of peppermint tea. Inside, a scarf, folded precisely, plum-colored, imperfect in the most human way, slightly uneven stitches, a bit of wavering in the rows, and at the edge, tiny hand-stitched letters. "Thank you for being warm." He froze, ran his fingers along the weave, each loop like a breath someone had sent into the world. It wasn't a product, it was a message, and in that odd, quiet moment, Liam felt as if it had been meant for him. He looked around. No one seemed to be searching for anything. He asked the cafe, the station guard. No one had seen it dropped. So he carried the scarf with him, holding it for the person who'd lost it, unaware that somewhere else a quiet girl wouldn't sleep that night. Grace returned to the station after work, scouring every bench, retracing her steps. She even asked the drink vendor nearby. No one had seen the box. Her palms were damp, her throat tight. This had been her first act of courage, giving something away, and the world had answered with silence. She told herself she wouldn't. Try again. That night, Liam posted a tweet on his personal account, a place where he often shared fragments from his life as a journalist. Someone dropped a plum-colored scarf at Central Station today, carefully hand-knit with a note that reads, "Thank you for being warm. I've got it. If this reaches you, I just want to say thank you. It didn't just warm my neck. It softened my day." He didn't add hashtags, didn't promote the post. Just let it be, like all the truest things he'd ever written, quiet and offered freely. Grace didn't use Twitter, but her co-worker did. The next day, during their lunch break, she turned her phone toward Grace, grinning. "Look, I think someone's talking about your missing scarf." Grace read the tweet slowly. Her heart thudded. Not because she'd been found, but because someone had seen the scarf for what it was, had felt its meaning, and that was more than she'd ever believed she deserved. The weather turned colder the next day. Liam wrapped the scarf around his neck as he stepped out of the cafe. He didn't know if its maker had seen his message, but he was sure of this. The thing that warms people isn't always wool or yarn, it's connection, and sometimes the most honest gifts come from strangers. From one scarf, 2 lives began to circle closer, quietly, accidentally. Each stitch a step in the pattern of something forming, not yet complete but already present, a beginning as gentle and unfinished as a row of knit left waiting for the next evening's light. The scarf still lived in Liam's backpack, tucked between a creased notebook and a tangle of recorder cords. Every time his fingers brushed against it, he would hear his own voice again, the one from that late-night tweet. "Thank you." The scarf didn't just warm my neck, it softened a chaotic day. It hadn't been an exaggeration. The scarf had become part of his daily rhythm, not a keepsake, but a quiet tether to something unnamed but grounding. That morning he stopped by the little cafe near his office, the one with fogged windows, a chipped wooden table in the back and Nora Jones always murmuring through the speakers. Liam pulled out his laptop, intending to finish an overdue interview draft, but was drawn instead to his inbox. There were messages, dozens, people claiming the scarf belonged to their mother, their sister, a friend, promising they could prove it, but none mentioned the embroidery. Not one referred to the small slanted message stitched into the hem. Only one person truly knew, and that person, he was beginning to think, might never step forward. Across the city, Grace sat at her desk in the small back office of the town library, sorting through a cart of dog-eared paperbacks. A co-worker approached with a grin and a phone held up like a secret. "You have to see this," she said, eyes bright. "Some journalists looking for whoever made this scarf. It looks exactly like the one you made for your grandmother, remember?" Grace froze. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled the screen. The photo in the post, it was hers. The plum color, the slight unevenness in the stitches, the embroidered message leaning gently to one side, from the time she'd stitched, without a hoop for the first time. Her heart pounded, not with joy but fear, fear of being seen, fear that if she was found, people would laugh. That the scarf was too plain, that the words, "Thank you for being warm, Lucien," would seem strange, even silly. Who stitched something like that on a scarf? It sounded too personal, too soft to share. She handed the phone back and mumbled, "It's not mine," so quietly. Even she barely heard it. But that night Grace searched for Liam's Twitter account. It wasn't hard. He was a local journalist, his name attached to thoughtful features and small human stories. Ava, her only close friend, had once shared a piece he wrote about a mute bike mechanic who offered free lessons. She'd cried reading that article. At her kitchen table, his profile photo was a blurry shot. Mid-laugh or mid-yawn, it was hard to tell. His tweets were a mix of snapshots from real life, fragments of dialogue, and quiet reflections. Then she found the post, the one about the scarf. Almost without thinking, she opened a new email draft to Liam. Journal Agmail. Subject. About the scarf. Hi, I think. I might know who made that scarf. K.G. She read it, then deleted it. Wrote again. Hi, it was made for warmth. Not recognition. Knitting girl, her finger hovered over send, but she couldn't press it. The familiar tangle of doubt returned, like every time she nearly shared a photo online but deleted it instead, like every compliment that made her blush and look away. Would someone like him, who wrote words that made strangers cry, really care about a slightly crooked scarf? The next day, Grace went to the cafe Liam frequented, a habit that formed with no intention she could name. She sat in the far corner with a worn book in hand, but her gaze stayed on the second chair from the door, and just as some quiet instinct had guessed, Liam walked in. The scarf was looped loosely around his neck. He wasn't remarkable at First glance, but the way he gently smoothed the scarf's edge, tucking it into his collar as though afraid it might wrinkle or fall, that made her exhale. He hadn't thrown it away, hadn't treated it like something temporary. He wore it like part of his day, simple, ordinary, and somehow deeply kind. Grace stood when he left. She followed at a distance, not out of fear or curiosity, but because some small part of her needed to see a little more, needed to watch someone make her offering matter. That night, she reopened the email draft. This time, she wrote only one line: "If you're still wondering who made it, maybe we can talk." In quiet. No name. No details. Just enough courage to be heard. She turned off the lamp and lay down, curling into the ivory knit blanket her grandmother had made long ago. Outside her window, the city exhaled, and for once, its breath seemed to match her own, slow, steady, and full of something softer than sleep. Rain tapped softly against the cafe window, steady, rhythmic, like a wordless song drawn across a pane fogged by time. Inside, the air was warm with the glow of golden lamplight and the scent of freshly baked cinnamon waffles. Liam sat alone at the table by the window, the plum-colored scarf loosely wrapped around his neck, a gesture so familiar now it had become part of his shape. He was scrolling through his inbox when he paused. No, just one quiet line. "If you're still wondering who made it, maybe we can talk." In quiet, no signature, no clues. But in some quiet place within him, Liam knew this was her. The next morning, he returned to Central Station, where it had all begun. Inside a book recently delivered to the newsroom, he found a note handwritten in soft violet ink, clipped between the pages: "Mocha Cafe, 4 p.m. Table by the window, just bring the scarf." No name again, but the handwriting was delicate, neat, just slightly hesitant, like the writer had one foot already turned away, just in case he didn't show. Liam arrived early. On the table were 2 cups of hot cocoa. One had already been ordered, a pale pink ceramic mug with a crack along the rim. Across from it sat a girl, unremarkable at first glance. No makeup, her hair pulled into a low knot, hands resting around a frayed cloth-bound notebook. Her eyes flickered toward the door, not expectant, just watchful. When he stepped inside and unwound the scarf, she simply nodded, like confirming something to herself. "It's me," she said quietly, almost a whisper. "I made the scarf." Liam stilled. He hadn't expected her to look like this, like someone who might struggle to speak to her own reflection. But when their eyes met, he felt it. The same quiet presence he'd sensed in every stitch of the scarf. Tender, unassuming, deeply human. "I thought it was a gift someone made for a lover," he said, smiling honestly. She shook her head. "It wasn't. It was just something I wanted to give the world. A thank you." They sat in the hush of rain and rising steam. Their words came slowly, like reading an old letter aloud, afraid to rush and miss something true. Liam told her he'd worn the scarf for 2 weeks, not just for warmth, but because it made him feel still, inside. Grace smiled faintly. "For the first time that day, I made it when I felt the loneliest," she said. "Maybe it carried that with it." "Then maybe," Liam said, almost without thinking, "you could help me make more." She looked up, startled. "I've been assigned a piece about a volunteer group collecting scarves for people on the street. You wouldn't need to speak. Just do what you're good at." Grace went quiet. Her eyes lowered, fingers curling together in her lap. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. "You can think about it," Liam added gently. "No pressure. You've already given more than enough, with just one scarf." A long pause. Then, softly, "If I do say yes," she murmured, "can you not tell anyone it was me who made them?" Liam nodded. Of course, and he understood. Some people don't want spotlights. They just want to know their gift was kept. Later, Grace walked home slowly through the rain. Her coat damp at the shoulders, but she didn't rush. In her hand was a folded slip of paper, an address Liam had written, and in her mind the echo of his voice, not pushing, not expecting, just inviting. She had never joined anything. Before, the idea of being noticed had always made her retreat, but something in the way he spoke made her feel safe, like knitting in her little room unseen, yet somehow still reaching someone. At home, she set the note beside her basket of yarn. That night, Grace picked up a new skein and began again, not for her grandmother, not for herself, but for someone unknown who needed warmth, and maybe too, for the one person who had seen her through the mess of tangled thread. The sky had softened into a gentle grey, the light outside Liam's apartment thin and silvery as it passed through the window panes. Inside, the dark wooden floor was warmed by a curled wool rug, and two folding chairs sat close together beneath a soft halo of lamplight. On the tea table, no laptop, no scribbled interview notes, just a basket of colourful yarn, a pair of new knitting needles, and a dog-eared book titled Knitting for Clumsy Hands. Grace arrived on time. She wore a muted blue-grey cardigan and clutched her own canvas bag full of neatly wound skeins. She still entered quietly, her gaze dipping toward the floor, shoulders slightly turned inward. But something had shifted, something gentler in her posture, as if she was learning how not to brace for too much attention, how not to flinch when someone looked at her. "Did you get the right supplies?" she asked softly, tapping a finger against the basket. Liam grinned, half confident, half sheepish. "I picked whatever looked soft and didn't make me itch. Thought that was a good start." Grace peered into the basket, nodded. The yarn was warm-toned, soft, beginner-friendly. She handed him 2 needles. "Start with the basic stitch," she said. "Knit stitch," Liam tried, but his fingers, trained for typing and fiddling with tangled recorder cords, fumbled clumsily over the yarn. He pulled too tight, then too loose. Every time he got a loop to stay, it slipped away again. Grace tried to keep her face neutral, but her eyes began to brighten with something that looked a lot like delight. Wait, was it left to right? Or right to left? He asked, frustrated. "Left to right," she said for the 4th time. "Miss, this feels like playing hide-and-seek with yarn." He sighed. And then Grace laughed. Not loudly, not long, but it was real. A soft, surprised sound, the kind that slips out when you've been holding your breath too long. It wasn't because he was funny. It was because, for the first time, someone didn't pretend they weren't bad at something, and he wasn't embarrassed about it either. "I thought you'd be faster at this," she said, teasing, then bit her lip, immediately afraid she'd crossed a line. But Liam didn't look wounded. He just laughed, looking up at her with something like relief. "I'm fast at writing about other people," he said. "When it comes to doing something for myself, I'm always clumsy." The room fell quiet for a moment. Grace leaned in, carefully fixing one of his dropped stitches. Their hands brushed just briefly. She pulled away quickly. Liam didn't say anything, but his gaze softened. Not the curious look of a journalist gathering quotes, but of someone fully, simply present. "Why did you start knitting?" he asked after a pause. Grace hesitated. She wasn't used to answering questions about herself. But here, in this quiet space with the faint scent of cinnamon in the air and his fingers tangled in wool, she didn't feel the need to hide. "Because I don't know how to talk when I'm sad," she said quietly. Liam didn't ask more. He simply nodded, then tried another stitch. This time it held. It wasn't perfect, but it stayed. He raised the needle triumphantly. "Ta-da!" Grace smiled. Not because the stitch was good, but because he had tried, really tried. "One stitch doesn't make a scarf," she reminded him gently. "But it's a step closer to something warm," he replied. She nodded. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel like the girl who had to hide behind the things she made. She was simply part of this slow, soft afternoon, with someone who didn't need her to explain herself, only to stay and knit alongside him. That evening, when Grace left, the rain had stopped. She carried her yarn basket with practiced ease. Liam walked her to the door, hesitated, then asked, "Next week, will you show me how to make pom-poms? I heard scarves with pom-poms are kind of cool." Grace laughed again. This time, louder, freer. "Only if you do your homework," she said. 10 more stitches before next time." He raised a hand like a vow, and when the door closed, Liam stood for a moment, glancing at the scarf still draped over the coat hook. He didn't put it away. He slipped it on, caught his reflection in the mirror, and whispered, "She," laughed. Grace walked home slowly, thinking of his awkward hands fumbling with yarn, and realized maybe the distance between two people isn't always a wall. Sometimes it's a scarf, uneven, unfinished, but enough to tie one life gently to another. December winds brushed against the cafe windows, slipping through the seams with a hush that carried the season's first real chill. Inside, Grace sat at her usual corner table, carefully folding a plum-colored scarf into a plain brown paper box. Along its hem, she had embroidered a simple white line, nothing decorative, just a small pause at the end of a quiet melody. It was her contribution to the charity event Liam had told her about, the first event she'd ever taken part in, even if only from the sidelines. It had taken her nearly 2 weeks to finish. Every stitch, every blend of muted colors, had come together during evenings filled with Liam's soft retellings of his meetings with the organizers, and stories of the unhoused men and women braving winter with too little. Once, he had said, "A scarf won't save the world, but it might help someone feel seen." That sentence stayed with her. It stitched itself into the yarn. Now, with the finished box tucked inside her tote bag, her hands trembled just slightly. The event was held in the city's community hall, an old echoey space with high ceilings and 2 bright fluorescent lights. Long tables lined the room, draped in white cloths and covered in donations. Hats, gloves, scarves in all shades and styles. Some were store-bought, tagged with "Sponsored by Volunteer." Others were handmade, bright, intricate, adorned, with pom-poms and little name cards from their crafters. Grace placed her box quietly at the intake table. A woman, mid-50s, with a neat bob haircut and a clipboard, was sorting through items. She opened the box, lifted the scarf. Her eyes swept across the stitching, the edge. Then she frowned slightly, running a finger along the hem. "Not very even," she said. Not unkindly, but with the finality of someone used to decisions. "Colors a bit muted, might get lost in the rest." Grace stood silent, lips pressed together. "I'll put it in the secondary bin. If we're short by count, we'll use it," the woman added. "Thank you for your contribution." The scarf was set aside beside a few gloves with loose seams and a hat missing a tag. No name, no mention. Just one more item in the use if necessary pile. Grace walked out without saying a word, even though Liam was just a few steps away, helping stack donation bins. He caught sight of her retreating figure and hurried after her. "Grace?" he called. "You're leaving already?" She paused, didn't turn. "They didn't choose it," she said softly. Liam slowed, stepping close enough to see the faint tremble in her shoulders. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need details. "I once wrote a piece that the paper refused to publish," he said, after a quiet moment. "Editor said it was too emotional, not enough data. I was crushed for a week. But I ended up sending it to the person it was about, and they told me it made them feel seen. That was enough." Grace shook her head. "It's not the same. Writing is your job, knitting isn't mine. But it's the only thing I ever thought might mean something." She turned then, eyes slightly red, but she didn't cry. "If even that isn't enough, maybe I was wrong." Liam didn't rush to reassure her. He just looked at her as one might listen to music that's too honest to interrupt. Then he asked gently, "Do you still have the pattern you drew for that scarf?" She nodded. "Then I want to learn how to make it," he said. "If the first one wasn't noticed, let's make another. Together." Grace let out a small, sad laugh. "You're terrible at knitting." "Remember." "I remember," he said. "Which is why my version is definitely going to need your help." A silence followed. Not a yes, not yet. But she didn't walk away. She stayed where she was, like a half-finished stitch, uncertain, but still holding on. That night, back in her apartment, Grace opened the drawer where she kept her sketchbook of scarf designs. She traced her finger along the lines. remembering every quiet evening by lamplight, every row of yarn sewn like a breath into the silence. She didn't pull out her needles. Not yet. She didn't start knitting again right away. But under the soft light on the last page of her book, she wrote in violet ink, "Scarf pattern, repeat, this time not alone." The room was hushed as Grace opened the door, the light from outside creeping in cautiously, as if afraid to disturb something already fragile inside her. Standing in the hallway was Liam, holding a crumpled paper bag in one hand, his faded khaki jacket draped over his shoulder. Their eyes met, not urgently, not searching, but with the kind of stillness that comes from someone who's brought something that needs to be placed gently, directly, into another's hands. He didn't say hello. He simply held the bag out to her, as if the gift inside could speak on his behalf. Grace took it slowly, not opening it right away. She could feel the softness beneath the paper and a scent, a mix of fresh yarn and the dry warmth of ink and paper. When she untied the ribbon and unfolded the wrapping, the scarf appeared, crooked, uneven, with bits of thread escaping here and there as if it were trying to breathe. It was clumsy work, undeniably so. But on one corner, barely legible, was a hand-stitched line, the thread smudged and letters uneven. "You tried for other... I tried for you... The last U was missing." Maybe he'd stitched it in a hurry, or maybe he didn't know how to end the thread. But that imperfection, the raw, unfinished honesty of it, tightened something in Grace's throat. Liam scratched. His head gave a sheepish smile. "I thought maybe you needed to see that no one should ever think what they make isn't enough, especially when they're making it for someone else." She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the scarf, reading it like a language only she could understand. Then slowly her fingers curled around it, not tightly, but with the quiet certainty of someone who, for the first time in weeks, had something she truly wanted to hold. She sat down, placed the scarf in her lap. Her hands moved along, the stitching pausing at every misstep, every stray knot. "You don't know how to knit," she said. "Correct," he replied. "And you still made this?" He nodded. "You made one for a stranger. I thought the least I could do was try to make one for you." Grace looked at him for a long time, and in her eyes something shifted, like the faintest fog being wiped from the surface of a mirror. It wasn't a nod. It wasn't a thank you. It was a smile. Small, quiet, but deep enough to hold the slow thaw of an entire winter. "You do know," Liam added playfully, "that it's objectively pretty bad." "It is," she replied, her voice teasing but soft, "but it's also the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me." After Liam left, Grace didn't pick up her needles. She didn't reach for the yarn. She didn't trace patterns or sketch out new ideas. Instead, she sat by the window, where the light of dusk folded gently around her, and placed the scarf on her pillow. Then she pulled out an old fabric-covered notebook, her grandmother's, the one she used to draw scarf designs in back in 8th grade. The lines inside were shaky, uneven, small swatches of dreams she'd never shown anyone. At the end of the book there was a page she'd never touched, blank waiting. Tonight, she wrote on it in violet ink. Her handwriting still leaned slightly, but her hand was steady. "The first crooked scarf anyone ever made for me. Not perfect, but the thread that held me still." And when she closed the notebook, she didn't feel alone anymore. She was someone who had once been overlooked, but now she was also someone else had chosen, in the clumsiest, most honest way possible, to say, "You matter," even when you don't believe it yourself. That night, after writing in her old notebook, Grace didn't go to bed right away. She slipped Liam's scarf around her shoulders and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. What she saw wasn't the girl who used to tuck handmade scarves into boxes, hoping not to be noticed. It was someone who had dared to re-knit the parts of herself she once gave up on. The scarf looked strange on her, lopsided, its knots uneven and visible, but it felt right. It looked like her, imperfect, but real. She reached for the new scarf she had finished, half made from her oldest pattern, the other half from Liam's clumsy, crooked yarn. The colors didn't match. The edge line was crooked, but every stitch had been a decision to stay, to try. Holding it in her hands, Grace thought for the first time, if someone could see me through a messy scarf, maybe I can let myself be seen again. The hall that day wasn't grand, but the golden light reached every corner, softening the edges of winter that still lingered in the bones of the city. It was the final donation event of the season. Scarves for those sleeping. Under bridges. By doorways in alleys the cold had not forgotten. Grace arrived early. The scarf was in a plain box tied with a ribbon the color of fog. She sat in the third row, hands sweating, breath steady but deep. Every mic test made her heart jump. But she didn't run. She waited. On stage, volunteers shared stories of the items they'd contributed. Intricate hats, perfect gloves, pom-pom scarves that drew laughter and claps. They spoke about dropped stitches and learning to knit, in the dark with YouTube videos. The audience cheered kindly after each one. Grace stayed seated. Her name wasn't on the list. But at the back of the room, Liam stood with his old notebook, eyes quietly watching her. When the host asked, "Is there anyone else who'd like to share the story behind their gift?" Liam raised his hand. Not quickly, not to force, just enough to say someone should be seen now. "There's someone here," he said, voice even, "who once believed her scarf didn't belong on a table like this. But if sincerity is the true thread, then every handmade gift has a place here. Especially this one." The host looked around. "Grace, are you here?" She didn't know why she stood. Her body moved before her mind could reason. Each step down the aisle felt longer than it was, as if she were walking through every moment she had once turned away from being seen. The spotlight wasn't harsh, just warm enough. She carried the scarf in her hands, no speech prepared, no script, only the gift, humble and unfinished, resting quietly between her palms. She unfolded it beneath the light. "This scarf," she said, voice trembling, "slightly isn't the prettiest." She paused. "It's made from one of my oldest patterns, and part of it was knitted by someone who didn't know how." She smiled faintly, breathing through the silence. "I used to think that if I wasn't perfect, then what I made didn't matter. But I've learned, sincerity can weave meaning." The room held its breath. Then the applause came. Gentle. Full, not thundering, but wide and steady, like small waves rolling to shore. It carried her and the scarf, and every moment she doubted whether what she made had a place in the world. Later, a little girl came up to her, eyes wide, and, "Shy, can I touch it?" she whispered. Grace knelt, placing the scarf in the girl's hands. The yarn fanned out over her tiny fingers, and in that moment, Grace knew. What she'd made wasn't just to keep someone warm. It was meant to be passed on. When the evening ended, the chairs began to empty. Liam remained at the back. He didn't walk toward her, didn't call out, he just watched. And when their eyes met, there were no words. Only a quiet nod, one that said, "I see you, in the exact place you belong." That night at home, Grace opened her notebook of scarf designs and turned to the very last page, the one her grandmother had never filled. She didn't sketch a new pattern, didn't write down numbers. She simply picked up her pen and in soft tilted violet ink wrote, "I no longer knit in silence." The cafe where it all began still breathed the same quiet warmth. Scuffed wooden tables, amber lights slanting across their surfaces, and soft jazz humming from the old speaker in the corner. An unobtrusive melody, just enough to make someone pause for a moment of stillness. Grace arrived first. She chose the same window-side table where she had once waited for Liam, unsure of herself. Outside, the season's first snow was falling gently, clinging to the glass in faint round smudges, like the imprint of forgotten hands. Her palm rested lightly on a mug of hot cocoa. Beside it, a pair of hand-knit gloves. She wore a beige wool coat, collar folded down to reveal a plum-colored scarf, her latest piece praised at the event for having a story inside every thread. Liam stepped in, bringing with him the scent of cold wind and a few melting flakes still caught in his hair. He saw her immediately and smiled. No rush, just a slow, quiet walk to the table where he sat across from her. Between them, 2 cups of cocoa steamed in tandem, just like the first time, except now there was nothing left to hide. "You really stood out," Liam said, eyes warm. Everyone kept asking who the girl with the purple scarf was. Grace smiled softly, eyes dipping but not retreating. "I'm not used to attention," she said, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore." A gentle silence settled between them, not from lack of words, but because some things no longer needed to be said. Liam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in newspaper. No ribbon, no box, just yarn, soft and slightly warm from his hand. "I have something," he said. "It's not beautiful, not like your pieces, but I think it belongs with the right person." Grace unfolded the wrapping. A scarf. Slate blue. The yarn was heavier, the stitches uneven, but firmer, more confident than before. Along the hem, stitched in white thread, a single line. "You stitched your way into my life." Her hand stilled. Her heart tightened, then melted into something quiet and full. "This time," she whispered, almost smiling, "you didn't miss a letter." "I practiced all week," Liam replied, "and every stitch I kept, thinking, if you don't take this, I'll make another. As many times as it takes." Grace looked up, straight into his eyes. No surprise, no explanation needed, only the certainty that the person sitting across from her was someone she once never dared to imagine sitting this close. "I'll take it," she said softly. "The scarf, and the one who made it." They both laughed, just a little, but enough to make the winter outside feel a little less heavy. After a while, Liam extended his hand. "Maybe we knit something new together," he said. "One scarf this time, but a really long one, enough for 2. Grace placed her hand in his and nodded. Her eyes shimmered, not because of the light, but because for the first time, she could see herself clearly, through his eyes. And she wasn't afraid of what she saw. She didn't know where they were going, or if this winter would be longer than most. But she knew this. From now on, every stitch wouldn't just be filling the spaces in her own heart. It would be a way forward, one loop at a time. With someone walking beside her, outside the cafe the snow kept falling, and through the fogged-up glass, passers-by could see 2 figures sitting close, knitting something not yet finished, but slowly taking shape. No rush, no need for perfection, just warmth. Thank you for staying until the very last stitch. If this story reached you, even just a little, leave a like or subscribe to the channel. It gives us reason to keep telling small stories that carry just enough warmth, like the first scarf you ever made with your own hands. And always remember, nothing is ever too clumsy if you do it with your heart, because it's the imperfect things that connect us most deeply to each other. The shy girl had planned to eat lunch alone, just her and a quiet bench in the park. But then she saw him, sitting hunched on the curb, eyes cast down like he was trying to disappear into the pavement. Without thinking too much, she tore her sandwich in half and offered it to him. No one would have guessed he had once been a millionaire, a man who had everything and then lost it all. A girl who didn't believe in herself now became the reason he wanted to begin again. Because sometimes one small act can open the door to an entirely new life. Emma usually sat alone on the second bench from the left, facing the patchy lawn dappled with sunlight. It was her favorite part of the day, 30 quiet minutes when no one expected her to answer emails, no one pushed for early reports, no phones trilled beside her ear. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the faint scent of damp leaves rising from the earth. She opened her lunchbox with the same small ritual each day. The first compartment held a homemade chicken mayo sandwich. The second held thinly sliced apples brushed with lemon juice to keep them from browning. Everything prepared the night before in the narrow kitchen of her rented 4th-floor apartment. Emma didn't like eating out. Crowded places made her feel lonelier somehow, even when someone sat beside her. Today the sunlight wasn't harsh, but it cast a pale gold edge on everything, like a film scene paused mid-moment. Emma raised the sandwich to her lips and felt it. Someone watching, not a casual glance, but a long, still gaze that settled on her like dust. She turned her head, slowly. About 10 paces away, tucked behind the broad trunk of a eucalyptus, a man sat on a bench mostly hidden from view. His coat was old, frayed at the shoulders. Thin silver hair caught the light. He didn't blink, didn't look away when she met his eyes. But there was nothing urgent in his stare, no intensity, no pleading, just a quiet sorrow. A tiredness that felt familiar, as if he'd sat there 1,000 times before watching countless people pass, none of them looking back. Emma turned away quickly. She took a bite of her sandwich, then another. Her heartbeat was steady, but something inside her shifted. It wasn't fear, not quite, just unfamiliar. Because in that gaze, she saw something of herself. The quiet detachment, the sense of being an extra in the group photo, the name that never got called first from any list. She glanced over again. He hadn't moved. The sandwich had lost its taste. She set it down, reached for her water. Bottle. A breeze lifted a few strands of her hair across her cheek. Emma drank, then looked once more. Their eyes met a second time. This time, she didn't look away. They watched each other for a few seconds. No smile, no nod. Just a quiet recognition. I see you. And you see me. A sparrow hopped near her feet, pecking at a breadcrumb. Emma watched it, turning over the thought, should I do something? She wasn't one to initiate. She always let her friends call the waiter. But this wasn't a restaurant, it was a park. No one was watching, just him and her. And a half-eaten sandwich. Carefully, she tore the remaining piece in two, wrapped it in a napkin. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. Standing up, her first step felt thunderous, like the whole park must have heard it. But no one looked. Only he did. She walked toward him, stopping just a step away, placed the wrapped sandwich beside him on the bench. No words. Then she turned to go. Thank you, he said, his voice rough and low, barely audible. Unless you were listening. Emma didn't turn back. But the corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile, not quite. She returned to her bench and didn't reopen her lunchbox. Her lunch break ended early, yet somehow she felt fuller. When her phone chimed the end of the hour, Emma stood. She didn't look back. But if she had, she would have seen him take a slow bite of the sandwich, eyes closed as if tasting something long forgotten. A memory, perhaps. A moment when someone had once shared something small, and maybe, just maybe, Emma had done the one thing no one else had managed that day, reminded someone that they still existed. That morning, Emma left home 10 minutes earlier than usual. Not because she needed to be at the office early, but because she needed space, a longer stretch of quiet. Time to sit with what she'd done yesterday and what she might do today. She walked slower than usual, her rubber soles making soft sounds against the brick pavement. In her bag was the same lunch she packed every day: chicken mayo sandwich, sliced apples, a small bottle of water. But today, there was something extra. A small paper bag carefully folded, holding an extra half sandwich, wrapped separately, as if reserved for someone who mattered. By midday, the park had filled up again. Office workers sought shade, students sprawled and laughed beneath the trees. Emma made her way to her usual bench, exhaling when she saw it empty. She sat but didn't open her lunch right away. Her gaze drifted quietly toward the bench under the eucalyptus tree, where he had sat yesterday. No one was there. A faint disappointment crept in, like walking into a cafe and finding your favorite pastry missing from the shelf. No one owed anyone anything, but part of her had hoped. She stayed still for a few minutes, trying to tell herself it was fine. Maybe he was just passing through. Maybe he'd found someplace better. Then she opened her lunchbox and began to eat. The first bite passed slowly. She'd just finished the second when, "Excuse me." The voice was low, rough, but familiar. Emma looked up. He was standing beside her bench, holding a worn cap in his hands, eyes cast down, as if he were the one apologizing for coming back. Emma said nothing. She simply gave a small nod, an invitation to sit. Not too close, but not too far either. He sat on the opposite end, keeping a careful distance as if afraid to disturb the fragile quiet between them. A breeze lifted the edge of her scarf. He looked at it, then at the lunch in her lap. "No need to share," he said gently. Yesterday was more than enough, but Emma had already placed the extra sandwich, wrapped in its own napkin, on the space between them. She didn't speak, didn't look at him, just left it there. He stared at the package for a long moment, as if it held something from long ago. Then he reached for it. Didn't open it right away, just held it. His hands were rough, calloused with chipped nails, but the way he held the sandwich was careful, almost reverent. Emma turned back to her own lunch, eating as though nothing had happened, but her heart no longer sat quietly inside her. There was something. Light in it now, like distant piano music, drifting into an open room. He unwrapped the sandwich. The scent of mayo and bread floated into the air, mingling with the smell of grass and warm sun. He took a bite, slow and thoughtful. His face softened. He didn't speak, didn't need to. "My grandmother used to make these," he murmured. Not to her exactly, more to the air between them. "She'd stir a little honey into the mayo. I always thought no one made them like that anymore." Emma paused. Her eyes widened, just slightly, then gentled again. She didn't say anything, but something beat differently inside her chest. After a while, he rested the half-eaten sandwich on his lap, folded his hands over it like someone in prayer. "Thank you," he said. "I know it's not a big thing for you, but yesterday..." It was the first time in a long time I felt seen. Emma still said nothing, but her throat tightened, and she took a sip of water to ease it. That moment between two strangers who hadn't exchanged names, who hadn't asked about each other's lives, sat delicately in the air, like a scene caught between two panes, of glass, fragile, clear and whole. At 12:55, Emma quietly packed up her lunchbox, snapped the lid shut as she always did. She stood, adjusted her scarf and looked at him once before walking away. He nodded. Not a dramatic nod, not expectant. Just a quiet gesture that said, "Maybe I'll see you again, if the world allows it." Emma walked toward the office, but her steps were no longer tentative like yesterday's. Maybe just a little, only a little. Something inside her had opened. And perhaps, just perhaps, the world had opened too, waiting to welcome her in. The third day of that quiet noon ritual arrived with softer sunlight and a breeze laced with the scent of last night's rain. Emma took her seat on the familiar bench, but this time her hands didn't reach for her lunchbox. She waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for, or who. But inside her there was a hush calling out his name, and then, as if the universe wished to preserve the thread of silence between them, he appeared, emerging from behind the trees, his step steady, gaze direct. No hesitation, no apology. Just presence. Emma shifted slightly to the left, a small motion but full of meaning. He understood. He sat down. There was no sandwich today. Emma hadn't packed an extra. She hadn't thought to, but he didn't ask. They sat in quiet for a while, the chirping birds, the distant hum of traffic, all muffled beneath the weight of unspoken things. "You might think I'm lying," he began, his voice low and slow like water moving under thawing ice. "But I once had 3 cars, a corner office on the top floor, and a team who called me boss. With respect?" Emma didn't respond, but something in her tilted, not because of what he said, but because there was no pride in his voice, not a trace. "My wife used to pack me lunch every day," he continued, his gaze drifting toward the lawn, "until I stopped noticing, too busy chasing more." The wind shifted. A eucalyptus branch dipped, and a single yellow leaf landed on Emma's lunchbox. "I lost it all," he breathed. "Not because of the market, not because someone wronged me, but because I believed I could never be wrong." Emma lifted the leaf gently, brushed it clean. Still, she didn't look at him, but her silence was not cold. It was the kind of listening that asked for nothing, that held no judgment. "I've been drifting for nearly 2 years," he said. "There were moments I thought maybe disappearing would make the world breathe easier. At that, Emma paused. A chill ran through her, not from the wind, but from the sudden, stark understanding that she might be sitting beside someone who had once stood at the edge. She didn't know what to say. All the lines from therapy books, all the neat phrases of comfort, none of them lived here. Only the sound of her heartbeat and his voice slowing like a confession. "When you handed me that sandwich," he said with a faint, almost incredulous smile, "I thought someone was playing a trick. Who's kind to a stranger for no reason?" Emma turned to him, not to answer, just to let him know she was here. "But you didn't ask." "Who I was. Didn't expect anything. You weren't afraid of me," he said. "You just shared, as if it were the most natural thing in the world." They fell into silence again. A gentle kind of stillness spread around them like the steam from a cup of tea. It didn't need resolution or clarity. It simply needed to be remembered. "I'm not asking for anything," he said at last. "I just wanted to say thank you. A true thank you." Emma nodded. Soft as a leaf, landing on a shoulder. She didn't smile, but her eyes shone. When her phone chimed the end of lunch, she stood, but this time she turned back to look at him, not for long, but long enough for him to see, "I heard you, and I believe you." He didn't say another word. He didn't need to, and she didn't need more. That evening, after a workday that felt endless, buried in spreadsheets and unanswered calls, Emma didn't head straight home. Instead, she walked against the tide of office workers pouring from the towers, slipping into a narrow alley wedged between two aging buildings. Street lamps flickered on above her, casting a dim yellow glow like memories stirred from a long sleep. "Where are we going?" he asked, footsteps trailing hers. Emma didn't answer right away. Her hand clutched the strap of her bag, not out of fear, but as if she were holding on to something delicate. Maybe hope. Maybe the quiet fear of being let down. They stopped in front of a small cafe with peeling paint on its sign and dusty glass windows. Inside sat a few wooden chairs draped with time-stained white cloths and a bar counter curved like the back of an old man. "I used to come here every Saturday afternoon," Emma said, her voice steadier than usual. He looked around, saying nothing. "It's been closed for 3 years," she continued. "The owner moved back to live with her daughter, but I still walk by every month just to make sure it's still here." A breeze stirred the wind chime above the awning, its delicate clinking soft against the quiet. Emma turned to him. "I used to dream about opening a little place like this. Not busy, not loud, just peaceful." He remained silent, not because he didn't have words, but because he knew what it meant to truly listen. "But I never dared to start," Emma said. "I always thought I wasn't good enough, not brave enough, not something enough." A bus roared past, brakes hissing as it pulled away. Then silence returned, fragile as a bubble. "Old things carry soul," he said finally. "They just need someone who still believes they have worth." She turned to look at him. Not guarded, not cautious, but with the soft curiosity of someone asking, "Do you really believe that?" "What did you see in me?" he asked. Not accusingly, just honestly. Emma pressed her lips together, then answered softly, "Maybe. Because I saw myself, someone who thought they had nothing left to give." He nodded, and for once his eyes weren't tired. There was something flickering there, a small flame, faint but persistent. "Would you want to try that? Dream again?" he asked, not looking out at the world this time, but directly at her. Emma didn't reply at first. In her mind, she saw again those quiet afternoons by her apartment window, sketching a cafe in her journal. A few bookshelves, some potted plants, a corner for strangers to sit and just be. "If I wasn't doing it alone, maybe I could," she whispered. He smiled. Not a perfect smile, but warm enough to shift the air between them. "Let me be the first to brew the coffee," he said. "I used to make it myself for my clients, back when I had an office and pride." Emma nodded. Sometimes trust doesn't come with oaths or promises. Sometimes it's simply someone walking beside you when you veer off the path you've always known. The beginning didn't arrive with a ribbon cutting or a grand agreement. For Emma, it began with a crumpled sheet of paper and a fountain pen that ran out of ink halfway through. They sat side by side on the back steps of the old cafe. The street lamp down the alley cast just enough light to outline their faces, but not enough to take away the quiet privacy each kept tucked inside. "I was thinking, maybe we call it Cafe Second Chance," he offered, sketching a steaming cup onto the paper. Emma looked up, lips pressed in a soft line. "Not a no, but not yet a yes, nor half a sandwich," he joked, this time with a small smile. She laughed, a real laugh. Crisp, warm, the kind that sounded like spring cracking open after a long frozen winter. "Sounds like a soup kitchen." "Well," he said, the sincerity in his voice smoothing out the humor, "didn't we save each other?" Emma didn't answer, but her pencil moved again, adding a stool, a little wooden menu board. That was her reply, night after night. They met after work, sometimes on those old steps, sometimes under a tree in the park, sketching by flashlight. He told stories about his years running a company, about choosing espresso machines based on water pressure, not price, about the clients who used to toast his name at parties, people who now wouldn't remember his face. Emma listened. But what struck her most wasn't the gloss of success. It was how he spoke of his failures, not with bitterness or blame, just quiet ownership. "Do you really think," she asked one night, their plan nearly complete, "people will buy coffee from a cart run by a broke old man and a quiet girl? They won't come for who's selling it," he said. "They'll come for how it makes them feel. And what if they don't feel anything at all?" "Then at least we did," he said, eyes still on the design sketch. Emma glanced at the words scribbled in his uneven handwriting. "Take what you need. Give what you can." The slogan he wanted to paint on the side of the cart. Part of her thought it was cheesy, but a bigger part thought it was right. She began to picture herself behind a small counter, pouring coffee, wiping cups, smiling at strangers. The image was foreign, but it no longer scared her. "We'll need funding," she said one day as they listed supplies. "How much do you have?" he asked, his voice calm. Emma looked down. "I have some savings. Not much. But I'm willing to use a portion." He didn't smile. In fact, he looked more serious than she'd ever seen him. "I won't let you lose anything because of me." "You didn't make me lose," she said. "You gave me a reason to try for the first time." A breeze scattered their papers. Emma stooped to gather them. One page held a crooked sketch of a coffee cart, with a logo shaped like half a sandwich. She stared at it a little longer than necessary, then tucked it carefully into her bag. That night when she got home, Emma didn't turn on the light. She stood in the dark for a long while, listening to her own heartbeat, the sound of someone beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could start again. Saturday. The sun was gentle, the breeze thin and cold enough to make you crave something warm in your hands. Emma stood behind the freshly painted white coffee cart, the logo still carrying the scent of new paint. Her fingers trembled slightly as they wrapped around the first paper cup. This wasn't a sketch anymore, no longer a whispered dream under flickering lamplight. The coffee cart, small, tidy, and unassuming, was real now, parked in the very park where she used to eat lunch alone. He stood beside her in a neatly pressed shirt, ironed by Emma herself, hair combed back, smile soft. No one would guess he'd been sleeping on a bench just weeks before, in the quiet corner of this same park. "You okay?" he asked. Emma took a breath, eyes scanning the short line ahead. Not long, just a few co-workers she'd nervously emailed the night before. But to her, each person was a quiet test of courage. "I will be," she whispered. The first to step forward was Mia, from accounting, the colleague who always offered a polite smile when passing Emma's desk, but never more than that. "I'll have a latte," Mia said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Emma poured the milk, pressed the machine, her hands trembling just enough to miss the mark, a drop of milk spilling over the rim. Her cheeks flushed. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a silent nod of reassurance. "Slow down," he whispered. "Every cup tells a story." The first drink was done. Emma held it out with both hands, lips pressed in anticipation. Mia took a sip. Her face lit up. "Oh, wow, this is really good. Emma, did you make this?" Emma nodded softly. Words stuck in her throat, but her smile emerged, tentative and shining like the first sunlight of spring. Then came the second customer, then the third. One by one. They came, tasted, lingered. No one rushed off. They stayed, chatted, told Emma how the scent reminded them of a street in Paris or a coffee shop their mother once took them to as a child. Emma remembered every word, not to brag but to believe, that the kindness she once gave quietly and without condition was circling back to her, softly, precisely, right on time. By noon, he handed her a cup of coffee he'd made himself. "For the founder," he said, eyes twinkling. Emma accepted it, the first cup she drank from their cart. It was strong, warm, and somehow familiar. She looked at him and nodded. "I think we can do this," she said. "We already have," he replied. They sat again on the old back steps after the tasting was done. The cart was pushed into the garage behind the cafe. In their hands, warm cups, and in their chests, something warmer, belief. Emma looked out across the park, eyes far away. "I used to think I was only good at small things, careful things, safe things. And today?" he asked. "Today?" She paused, searching for the right shape of the truth. "I think I'm good at beginning." He didn't say anything, just looked at her the way someone looks at a seedling breaking through the soil after a long, hard storm. Early Sunday morning, the sky stretched out pale and colorless, like a sheet left undyed. The air was crisp, the scent of wet earth lingering after last night's rain. Emma arrived early, her old beige scarf trailing softly behind her with every step. The coffee cart had already been rolled into place, right at the bend between two towering trees, where weekend passers-by wandered slowly, unhurried. The small logo on the side of the cart glowed faintly under the streetlight. Second Chance Cafe, a quiet reminder of why it was here at all. Emma checked everything. Paper cups, sugar, milk, the espresso machine. Her hands trembled slightly, but her movements were steady. He stood beside her, silent, watching, his presence behind her like a solid wall, not pushing, just ready to catch her if she wavered. "I imagined this day a dozen times," Emma said, her voice softer than the wind. "But I never thought it would feel this real." He nodded. "Truth doesn't shout, and it just shows up and sits beside you, like an old friend." The first customer appeared, a middle-aged woman walking her dog. She paused, tilted her head toward the logo, then approached. "Good morning," she said. "What's special about the coffee here?" Emma opened her mouth to describe the flavor notes, the almond milk, the carefully sourced roast, but something stopped her. She looked into the woman's eyes and smiled. "Our coffee has something people often forget," she said. "What's that?" "Ty's kindness," Emma replied as gently as a breath. The woman laughed. "Then give me a cupful of kindness." The first cup was handed over. Emma watched, not because she doubted the taste, but because in that moment she realized she had just handed someone a piece of her dream. The next guests arrived slowly. A college student with a book tucked under his arm, a young couple, hand in hand, an elderly man on his morning walk. They stayed, not just for caffeine, but for something else. The way the cart stood there, quiet and beautiful, like it had always belonged. Each cup of coffee came with a bit of conversation, a warm glance, a smile that felt like it had waited years to be used. He didn't say much, just adjusted the milk steamer, wiped the counter, handed out napkins. But everyone felt he was part of the place, like a soul that had been rooted there long before the cart had wheels. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, this cafe is so pretty." "Is it from a fairy tale?" Emma heard her and laughed. The question, though childlike, felt oddly true, because sometimes fairy tales don't need castles or magic spells, just a small cart, a man who once fell, and a girl who once didn't believe in herself. As the morning drifted on, the sun warmed and the line grew longer. One customer paused, asked, "What's the story behind this place?" Emma glanced at him. He didn't speak, just nodded, quietly handing the story over to her. She drew a breath, then said, "It started with a lunch, a sandwich, and someone I almost didn't see." The customer smiled, eyes attentive, and Emma went on, not like she was telling a tale, but like she was passing a gentle truth into the hands of someone willing to hold it. By late afternoon, they closed the cart, packed everything away. He sat down on the familiar steps, exhaling. With quiet relief, "You did it," he said. Emma sat beside him, resting her head against the wooden cart. "Not alone." He looked at her and smiled. "I didn't say alone, I said you, because only you could have turned a small meal into something this big." Emma lowered her gaze, didn't reply, but her eyes shimmered. And inside she knew, today what she served wasn't just coffee. It was belief that everyone deserves a second chance. Some things begin in silence, and some things end in it too, but the kind of silence that lingers like sweetness on the air, warm as the last breath of spring before summer bursts into bloom. That afternoon, the park was just as peaceful as ever. Sparrows still hopped along the stone path. Bicycles still rolled lazily beneath rustling trees. But something had changed. Emma was no longer sitting alone on the old bench. Beside her was the man who had once looked at her sandwich as if it were a framed painting come to life. They were no longer strangers brought together by chance. They were two people who had rebuilt something from the ruins. Quietly, with trust and kindness, between them sat a small lunchbox, unremarkable in appearance, but a symbol of everything that had brought them here. "We really did it," Emma said, not looking at him but at the apple slice in her hand, as if it held her entire journey. "We didn't just do it," he replied, eyes following a slow-moving cloud across the pale sky. "We became part of each other's story." They ate slowly, unhurried, as though each bite held a memory. A few familiar faces passed by, waving like to old friends. Some called Emma by name. Others nodded at him with quiet familiarity. No one saw a homeless man anymore. No one saw a timid girl. They were seen now for who they truly were. A little girl ran past with her dog, then stopped, wide-eyed. "Are you the coffee people? I had your hot chocolate the other day. It was so good." Emma beamed. "Would you like another?" The girl nodded so hard her curls bounced. He stood and waved toward the coffee cart parked by the grass. "Come on, Miss Emma's going to make you a special one." Emma laughed and rose to follow. But before leaving, she glanced back at the bench, the one that had once held her loneliness, and now held the memory of her first connection. "We should name it the Sandwich Bench," she joked. "Or the Second Chance Seat," he said, serious though his eyes twinkled. They walked slowly, Emma's scarf fluttering behind her in the breeze. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know where the little coffee cart might take them. But she knew this much: every beginning, no matter how small, has the power to change a life. And it all started with a sandwich, shared in kindness. If you believe a single sandwich can save a soul, leave a heart in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to help us share more of these small stories, the kind that just might change a life.